He was just an old man, crossing a highway on foot, flowers in one hand, a cane in the other, didn't ask for help, didn't break a single law. But a rookie cop didn't like how slow he moved, demanded he get off the road, called him non-compliant, and when the man didn't move fast enough, the officer pulled a taser and fired. The flowers scattered. The man hit the asphalt. 5 minutes later, traffic in all directions was frozen because an army convoy shut the highway down. And out stepped a lieutenant colonel who walked straight past the cruisers and said, "Who just put Staff Sergeant Brenner on the ground?" Everything stopped after that. Subscribe before the truth drops. Comment where you're watching from. And listen closely. Because what happened next changed how that town treats its veterans forever. The morning mist was still hanging over Highway 27 when Harold Brenner stepped off the gravel shoulder and looked both ways down the empty road. It wasn't quite 6 a.m., and the Kentucky hills were just starting to catch the first pale light of dawn. Most folks were still drinking their first cup of coffee, but Hal had been up since 4:30, same routine he'd followed for 13 years now. Hal adjusted his grip on the black carbon fiber cane, a VA upgrade from the old wooden one that had given him splinters, and checked the Velcro straps on his leg brace one more time. The thing chafed something awful, especially in the morning when his knee was stiff from sleeping. It was a souvenir from an IED outside Baghdad that the VA doctor said would never fully heal. "Best we can do is manage the pain," they'd told him. At 69, Hal had made peace with a lot of things the army had left him with. The nightmares came less often now. The knee would always hurt. And some mornings, getting out of bed, felt like a military operation all its own. In his left hand, he carried a small bouquet of red carnations from the gas station down the road. Nothing fancy, the kind wrapped in plastic with stems cut uneven. But they were red, and they were fresh, and that's what mattered. Red had been Nathan's favorite color. Hal had been making this walk for 13 years now. Every April 16th, always alone, always at first light when the traffic was light and he could cross without causing a fuss. He'd park his old Ford pickup about 2 miles down the shoulder road and walk the rest of the way in. It gave him time to think, to remember, to prepare for what never got easier. Today would have been his son Nathan's 32nd birthday. The concrete median where Nathan died wasn't marked with any official memorial. The state wouldn't allow it, liability issues, they said. But Hal had bolted a small steel plaque into the guardrail himself. Just a simple engraving. PFC Nathan Brenner, Kentucky National Guard, 1990-2011, never forgotten. Black ice, rolled truck. Nathan was coming home from National Guard drill, probably driving too fast like kids do. 19 years old and still had his dress greens hanging in the closet. Hal stepped into the first lane, checking over his shoulder. Look for headlights. The morning air was crisp enough to see his breath, and dew had settled on the yellow center line, making it slick under his boots. His limp was more pronounced in the morning cold. The metal rod in his knee didn't appreciate Kentucky weather, but he moved steady, deliberate, like he was walking point on patrol instead of crossing a 2-lane highway in rural Kentucky. Semi-truck had passed about 5 minutes earlier, heading toward Louisville. Other than that, the road was empty except for the occasional deer track crossing the shoulder and disappearing into the tree line. To anyone driving by at this hour, he probably looked like an old man taking his sweet time getting across the road. Maybe someone whose car had broken down. Maybe someone not quite right in the head, but this wasn't jaywalking. This was a father reporting for duty. Officer Brian West had been patrolling Highway 27 for 9 months now, and he took pride in keeping his section of road safe. At 24, he was still new enough that every call felt important. When dispatch reported a pedestrian in the roadway, West hit his overheads and headed toward the scene. Unit 47, elderly male pedestrian, possible vagrant, walking inactive. Traffic lanes eastbound Highway 27, proceed with caution. He spotted the figure ahead about a quarter-mile out. An older man, in what looked like military surplus clothing and a faded army cap, moving slowly with the help of a walking stick. The guy was already halfway across the highway, heading for the concrete median strip with what appeared to be flowers in his hand. West pulled onto the shoulder, put the cruiser in park, and reached for his PA system. "Sir, you need to return to the shoulder immediately. You're walking in an active traffic lane and creating a safety hazard." The man looked over his shoulder in West's direction, but kept walking. Didn't seem to hear properly or didn't care to respond. Maybe both. West tried again, cranking up the volume. "Sir, this is Officer West with Kentucky State Police. Move to the shoulder now. You're in violation of traffic safety code." The old man raised his hand like he was asking for just a minute and kept moving toward the median. West felt his jaw tighten. In academy training, they'd hammered home the importance of immediate compliance. Non-compliant civilians were potential safety hazards to themselves, to responding officers, and to other motorists. Every second this guy stayed in the road increased the risk of someone getting hurt if traffic picked up. West stepped out of his cruiser and approached on foot, his hand instinctively checking the position of his duty belt equipment. Radio, taser, a pepper spray, service weapon, all secure and accessible if the situation escalated. "Sir, I'm giving you a direct lawful order to return to the shoulder. You're violating Kentucky Revised Statute 189.570 regarding pedestrian traffic, and I'm authorized to detain you for public safety." The man finally turned around, breathing a little hard from the walk. Up close, West could see he was older than he'd initially thought, maybe late 60s, with weathered hands and the kind of deep lines around his eyes that came from squinting into too many suns. His jacket was clean but worn, and his jeans had been patched at the knee. "Just need to get to the other side, officer," the man said, his voice steady but tired. "I do this walk every year. Won't take but a minute, then I'll be out of your way." "I don't care what you did last year," West replied, his training kicking in automatically. "Right now you're obstructing traffic and ignoring direct police commands. I need you to comply immediately or I'll be forced to detain you." The old man gestured ahead with his cane toward the median strip. "My boy's memorial is over there. Just let me put these flowers down and I'll head straight back to my truck." To West, the gesture with the cane looked potentially aggressive. Academy instructors had drilled into them that any object could be used as a weapon, and elderly subjects could be unpredictable, especially if they were suffering from dementia or substance impairment. The man's refusal to comply, combined with his apparent disorientation about basic traffic laws, suggested possible mental health issues. "Sir, you're refusing to comply with lawful orders from a police officer. I'm going to need to call for backup." He keyed his shoulder radio. "Dispatch Unit 47. I've got a non-compliant subject refusing direct orders. Elderly male, possibly impaired or experiencing mental health crisis. Request additional unit for backup." The man took another step toward the median. "Please, officer, I'm not causing any trouble. I just want to remember my son." West made his decision. He couldn't let this continue. The subject was becoming increasingly non-compliant, and morning commuter traffic would be starting soon. He needed to establish control of the situation before it became more dangerous. He rushed forward to take hold of the man's arm, intending to escort him back to the shoulder. "Sir, you're under detention for your own safety." That's when everything went sideways. The old guy jerked away, startled by the sudden contact, and his bad leg completely gave out. He went down hard on the asphalt, his cane clattering. Away across the center line, the flowers scattering in all directions. Some of the carnations ended up under West's boots. "Stay down," West shouted, his adrenaline spiking as the situation rapidly escalated. "Don't move. Keep your hands where I can see them." The man was trying to push himself up with one hand, the other pressed against his knee where he'd landed hard. "I'm not fighting you," he said through gritted teeth. "I just fell. My leg brace got twisted." But West was already committed to the use of force. The subject had resisted detention, had fallen during the struggle, and was now on the ground in an unpredictable state. Protocol was clear: maintain control until backup arrived. His hand moved to his taser. "Stop moving! I'm not going to tell you again!" "I'm just trying to sit up," the man said, his voice strained. "You don't have to—" "Taser, taser, taser," West announced, following department protocol. The probes fired, hitting the old man's center mass. 50,000 volts of electricity coursed through his body. His back arched, muscles locked in spasm, and he collapsed back onto the pavement, convulsing. The sound that came out of him wasn't quite a scream, more like the grunt of a man who'd been gut-punched and couldn't catch his breath. That's when the 18-wheeler that had been slowing down for the flashing police lights pulled onto the shoulder, and the driver started shouting from his cab, "Jesus Christ, officer! You just tased Harold Brenner!" West felt his stomach drop straight through the asphalt. The name rang a bell, something from orientation materials when he'd transferred to this district from Jefferson County. A pickup truck pulled over behind the semi, and a man in Carhartt work clothes jumped out. "That's Hal Brenner, you damn fool. He comes here every year for his son. What the hell is wrong with you?" More vehicles were stopping now. A woman in a Honda Civic had her phone out, recording. An older man in a fishing vest was shaking his head and talking to someone on his cell phone. West looked down at the man convulsing on the asphalt, flowers scattered around him like some kind of crime scene evidence, and realized with dawning horror that he'd made a terrible mistake. Before he could even process what to do next, someone behind him called out in a voice that carried absolute authority, "Officer, I need you to step away from him, right now." West spun around to see a man in Army ACUs walking up from a military-style pickup truck that had pulled over on the opposite shoulder. The name tape on his chest read Daniels, and he wore the kind of combat patch that meant he'd been deployed somewhere serious. There was also a Ranger tab on his left shoulder, and West had been around enough military folks to know what that meant. "Sir, this is an active police investigation," West started to say, but his voice came out shakier than he intended. Daniels completely ignored him and knelt beside Hal, who was still twitching from the electrical shock. "Easy there. Sarge, I got you. Help's on the way." "You know this individual?" West asked, trying to regain some semblance of control over the situation. "Yeah, I know him," Daniel said without looking up from checking Hal's pulse. "Served under his son in the Guard before Nathan got killed. And you just tased a decorated combat veteran at his kid's memorial." Daniels pulled out his cell phone and speed-dialed a number. "This is Staff Sergeant Daniels. I need you to contact Colonel Williams immediately. We have a situation on Highway 27. A police officer just tased Sergeant Harold Brenner at Nathan's memorial site." "Yes, sir, I'm serious." "No, sir, he's conscious, but he needs medical attention." That's when West heard it, the low rumble of heavy diesel engines coming up the highway from the west. Not civilian traffic, something bigger, something that moved with the kind of coordinated purpose that made the hair on his neck stand up. He looked up to see a convoy of military vehicles cresting the hill about a half-mile out, moving in tight formation toward their location. Even at this distance, he could tell they weren't National Guard weekend warriors heading to drill. These were active duty vehicles with the kind of communications equipment and authorization that allowed them to use civilian highways like their own personal road network. 6 olive drab Humvees and supply trucks, running with emergency flashes but no sirens, rolling down Highway 27 like they owned every mile of asphalt from here to Fort Knox. Which, as it turned out, they were about to. Hal Brenner lay on the cold morning asphalt, his body still jerking. With residual electrical current from the taser probes, the metal leg brace had twisted completely sideways when he fell, and blood was seeping through his windbreaker where he'd scraped against the rough pavement. His army cap had rolled several feet away and was now sitting crowned down in a puddle of motor oil. He wasn't screaming, wasn't even making much noise beyond the involuntary gasps that came with 50,000 volts coursing through a 69-year-old body that had already taken more punishment than most people could imagine. But his eyes were open, and he was trying to speak. Daniel stayed right beside him, one hand on his shoulder to keep him from trying to sit up too quickly. "Just breathe. Sarge, easy does it, you're gonna be all right." "My flowers," Hal whispered, looking around at the scattered carnations. Some had been crushed under boots, others were blowing away in the morning breeze. "Don't worry about the flowers right now," Daniel said gently. "We'll get you some fresh ones." Officer West stood about 10 feet away, his radio crackling, with dispatch asking for a status update. He could see more civilian vehicles slowing down now, drivers getting out with cell phones already recording the scene. A few truckers had parked their rigs on the shoulder and were walking over to see what was happening. Word was spreading fast on the CB channels. The lead Humvee in the convoy pulled up and parked diagonally across both eastbound lanes, completely blocking traffic. The second vehicle did the same for westbound. Within 30 seconds, Highway 27 had been transformed into a military checkpoint, and nobody was going anywhere until the soldiers decided they could. A woman in Army ACUs climbed out of the lead vehicle, Captain Lorraine Chen. She took one look at the scene and immediately started coordinating the response. "Medic up, traffic control, establish a perimeter." Soldiers deployed from the other vehicles with practiced efficiency. Two began directing traffic to the shoulder, while another pair established a security perimeter around the scene. Captain Chen walked straight to where Hal was lying on the ground. She didn't acknowledge Officer West, didn't ask for permission, didn't introduce herself or explain her authority. She just knelt beside Daniels and began her own assessment of the situation. "Sergeant Brenner, can you hear me clearly? I'm Captain Chen, 19th Engineer Battalion out of Fort Knox. We're going to take care of you, but I need to know if you're experiencing any chest pain or difficulty breathing." Hal's eyes focused on her face with some difficulty. His mouth worked for a moment before he managed to speak in a voice that was hoarse, but still carried the crisp diction of an old non-com. "No chest pain, ma'am, just feel like I got kicked by a mule. That's the taser after effects. It'll pass." She turned to call over her shoulder. "Where's my medic?" A soldier with a comprehensive field medical kit was already jogging over from one of the supply trucks. Specialist Rodriguez, according to his name tape, moved with the confidence of someone who'd treated everything from gunshot wounds to heat stroke under conditions a lot worse than a Kentucky highway. He knelt on Hal's other side and began checking vitals while Captain Chen continued her questions. "Any history of heart problems? Diabetes? Are you taking any medications that might interact with electrical shock?" "High blood pressure pills," Hal said, "and some arthritis medication. Nothing serious." Rodriguez was already taking his pulse and checking his pupils with a small flashlight. "Blood pressure's elevated, but not dangerously so." Pupils are responsive. Some minor abrasions on the hands and knees, looks like from the fall. That's when the last vehicle in the convoy pulled up. A black SUV with Fort Knox base plates and enough communication antennas to run a small military operation. Out stepped Lieutenant Colonel Marcus Williams, and you could tell immediately by the way every soldier in the area subtly adjusted their posture that the man in charge had arrived. Williams was the kind of officer who didn't need to raise his voice to command a battalion. Tall, grey at the temples, with the easy authority of someone who'd spent 30 years making life-and-death decisions under pressure. He wore the kind of deployment patches that told a story of Iraq, Afghanistan, and places that probably didn't make it into the newspapers. He walked over to where Hal was being treated, his boots clicking on the asphalt with measured precision. When he knelt down beside the medic, there was something almost ceremonial about the gesture. Sergeant Brenner, I'm Colonel Williams, commanding officer of the 19th Engineer Battalion. I understand you've had a difficult morning. Hal tried to sit up, but Rodriguez gently pressed him back down. Stay still for a few more minutes, Sergeant. Colonel's orders. Sir, Hal said, looking up at Williams. I was just trying to visit my boy's memorial. Didn't mean to. Cause all this trouble. Williams's expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. You didn't cause any trouble, Sergeant, and you're going to finish what you came here to do. He stood and turned to Officer West for the first time. The young policeman had been standing there watching the military response with growing unease, unsure of his role, now that soldiers had taken control of his crime scene. You the responding officer? Williams asked. Yes, sir. Officer West, Kentucky State Police. I was responding to a call about a pedestrian in the roadway creating a traffic hazard. And you felt it necessary to use a taser on a 69-year-old disabled veteran carrying flowers? West felt his mouth go dry. The question was asked in a perfectly reasonable tone, but something about it made his uniform feel too tight. He was non-compliant, sir. Refused multiple direct orders to return to the shoulder. When I attempted to detain him for his own safety, he resisted and fell. I believed he might be impaired or experiencing a mental health episode. Did he threaten you in any way? No, sir, but he was carrying a walking stick, and when he pointed it in my direction, did you identify what he was carrying in his other hand? West glanced over at the scattered carnations, some of which were still visible on the asphalt. Flowers, sir. Did you ask him why he was crossing the road? He mentioned something about visiting his son, but I couldn't allow him to continue violating traffic safety protocols. But you didn't listen to what he was telling you. It wasn't a question. Williams's voice remained perfectly calm, which somehow made the conversation more devastating than if he'd been shouting. You saw an elderly man with a pronounced limp carrying flowers, trying to cross a highway at dawn, and your first instinct was to assume he was a problem that needed to be controlled, rather than a person who might need assistance. The colonel turned to Captain Chen. What's his medical status? Stable, sir. Minor contusions from the fall, some aggravation of his existing leg injury where the brace twisted, taser burn marks on his jacket but no serious tissue damage. He should be fine to continue with appropriate assistance. Outstanding. Williams looked back at West. Officer, I'm going to ask you to step back and allow my personnel to handle this situation. Sergeant Brenner has every right to visit his son's memorial, and we're going to ensure he can do so safely and with dignity. Sir, I'm not sure you have legal authority to supersede a local police investigation. Williams just looked at him. Didn't raise his voice, didn't threaten, didn't even change his expression. He just looked at Officer West with the kind of steady, measured gaze that had ended arguments in congressional hearing rooms and enemy command bunkers alike. West stepped back. The medic helped Hal to his feet slowly, checking his balance and making sure the twisted leg brace was properly readjusted. Daniels gathered up as many of the scattered carnations as he could find and did his best to rewrap them with the remains of the plastic covering. How do they look? Hal asked, examining. The flowers, like they've been through a war, Daniels said with a slight smile. But they're still red, and they're still for Nathan. Colonel Williams watched this exchange with the kind of attention that made it clear he understood exactly what was happening here. Ready to finish what you came here to do, Sergeant? Hal nodded, accepting the flowers from Daniels and testing his weight on the readjusted leg brace. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Daniels Rodriguez, escort Sergeant Brenner to the memorial site. Take your time. We're not going anywhere until he's ready. The entire convoy of soldiers and the growing crowd of civilian witnesses watched as Harold Brenner, supported by 2 active-duty Army personnel, walked the final 100 yards to the concrete median where his son had died 13 years ago. He moved slowly, carefully, but with his dignity completely intact. The small memorial plaque was still there, bolted to the guardrail just as Hal had left it after his last visit. The engraving was weathered but still clearly readable. PFC Nathan Brenner, Kentucky National Guard, 1990-2011, never forgotten. Hal knelt down beside the plaque with some difficulty, his bad knee protesting against the cold concrete. He carefully arranged the battered carnations at the base of the memorial, taking time to make sure each flower was positioned just right. "Happy birthday, son," he said quietly. "Sorry I'm a little late this year." He stayed there for several minutes, his lips moving in the kind of private conversation that fathers have with children who will never grow old. Daniels and Rodriguez stood at respectful attention nearby, not as guards, but as honor detail. When Hal was ready, they helped him back to his feet and escorted him across the highway to where his old pickup truck was parked on the shoulder. Only then did Colonel Williams approach Officer West again. "Son, I want you to think very carefully about what happened here today," Williams said, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd spent decades teaching hard lessons. "That man walked 2 miles from his truck to honor his boy's memory, same as he's done every year since Nathan was killed in a training accident. Local police know about his annual visits. County Sheriff's Department knows about it. Hell, it was mentioned in the VFW newsletter just last month. West's face had gone pale during the long wait. I didn't know about any of that. I'm relatively new to this patrol sector." "That's not an excuse, it's a failure," Williams replied. "Part of your job, maybe the most important part, is knowing your community, understanding who lives there, what matters to them, what their stories are. If you'd taken 30 seconds to actually listen to what Sergeant Brenner was telling you, instead of immediately assuming he was a problem to be controlled, you'd have learned some things." Williams paused, studying the younger man's face. "You'd have learned that Harold Brenner served 3 combat tours in Iraq and Afghanistan, that he pulled 2 wounded soldiers out of a burning Humvee in Ramadi while under enemy fire, that he earned a Bronze Star for valor and a Purple Heart for wounds received in action, that he came home and worked construction for 20 years, helped build half the roads in this county, that he lost his only child to a training accident and has been quietly honoring that boy's memory ever since." The colonel pulled out his phone and made a quick call. "This is Williams. I need you to contact Kentucky State Police Headquarters immediately. Officer Brian West, badge number..." He glanced at West's nameplate. 4127, used excessive force against a disabled combat veteran during what should have been a routine civil interaction. The incident was witnessed by multiple civilians and recorded on various devices. Yes, I said excessive force. Yes, today. Yes, it needs immediate administrative attention. He ended the call and looked back at West. "Your body camera footage will be reviewed by both your department and a federal civil rights investigation team. There will be an internal affairs inquiry, and frankly, if I were you, I'd start thinking seriously about whether law enforcement is really the right career path." Williams turned to Captain Chen. "Make sure all witness statements are collected and properly documented. I want a complete after-action report on my desk by close of business today." "Yes, sir." The convoy began the process of clearing the highway, but they didn't rush. Colonel Williams personally made sure that Hal was safely seated in his pickup truck and capable of driving home before giving the order to move out. He even walked over to the old Ford and tapped on the driver's side window. Hal rolled it down. "Thank you, Colonel, for everything. Thank you, Sergeant, for your service and for raising a son who served with honor." As the military, vehicles pulled back onto Highway 27 in perfect formation, and traffic began flowing normally again. Officer West stood alone beside his cruiser. His radio was buzzing with calls from dispatch, but he couldn't seem to make himself answer. His hands were shaking, and he couldn't tell if it was from adrenaline or the dawning realization of what he'd done. He'd come out here to write a simple citation for a pedestrian violation. Instead, he'd tased a decorated combat veteran at his son's memorial and learned the hardest possible lesson about the difference between authority and respect. Harold Brenner had asked for nothing more than the right to remember his child in peace. When that right was threatened, an entire convoy of soldiers had stopped what they were doing to make sure he got it, because that's what you do for family. And in the army, once you're family forever. The drive home took Hal longer than usual because he kept having to pull over when his hands started shaking. By the time he got back to his house, word had already spread through the veteran community. His answering machine was blinking with messages. That evening, Colonel Williams called to check on him personally and inform him that Officer West had been placed on administrative leave. 3 weeks later, West was terminated from the Kentucky State Police. The department implemented new training protocols for interactions with veterans and memorial sites. The following April 16th, when Hal made his annual walk to Nathan's memorial, he found something unexpected waiting for him. A small American flag had been placed next to his son's plaque, along with a handwritten note: "Sergeant Brenner, your son's sacrifice and your faithful remembrance of him inspire us all. With respect, the soldiers of the 19th Engineer Battalion." It was signed by Colonel Williams and countersigned by every member of the convoy that had responded that morning. Hal knelt down beside the memorial, placed his annual bouquet of red carnations, and for the first time in 13 years, he wasn't alone on Nathan's birthday, because once the army adopts you, you stay adopted, and some bonds are stronger than death, stronger than time, and stronger than the small-minded people who think authority means never having to show respect. So here's the question this story leaves us with: how many Harold Brenners are out there, quietly honoring their fallen loved ones, asking for nothing more than to be left in peace? And how many Officer Wests are out there, so focused on control and compliance that they forget to see the human being standing right in front of them? In our rush to enforce rules and maintain order, are we losing sight of the stories that give those rules meaning in the first place? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. These conversations matter more than you might realize, and we read every single response. If this story made you think about the difference between having authority and earning respect, go ahead and hit that like button. It genuinely helps us reach more people who need to hear these stories. Subscribe and ring that notification bell so you never miss one of our daily videos honoring the men and women who've served our country with distinction. And if you know someone who could use a reminder about what real strength looks like, someone who mistakes loudness for leadership or badges for character, share this video with them. Your next story is waiting right there on your screen. Click it, and we'll see you tomorrow with another moment that proves the same truth over and over again. Real heroes don't demand respect. They earn it so completely that even their enemies have no choice but to give it. Until then, thanks for being here with us.